session of Insight. Hopefully, everybody had the chance to see Michelle from Forrester. I thought it was a very insightful session. So if you by any chance missed that, I'm sure there's a way that you can go and see the recorded video. But we learned a lot of things from that session, and a part of it, we're going to talk about some of those topics in our session here. My name is Amir Schechter. I'm the executive director at Convergint Digital Transformation team, leading the solution enablement effort. Again, thank you for joining us today to discuss the future of our workplace. This is really a key topic. It's super complex at this point, constantly changing with the impact of COVID on people, companies, families, global markets, and technology. This session will focus on the COVID-19 crisis, the way that we had to change some of the things that we're doing, how it drives the acceleration of workforce digital transformation, the challenges of an on-site and remote workforce, productivity, safety, and security that forces us to rethink our strategies. This panel would discuss market trends, emerging workplace strategies, safety, health, security, productivity, and obviously the human element impact. Joining me today are two members of Convergint Digital Transformation team. We have Doug Greenwald. Doug is a Digital Transformation Business Development Manager. Doug leads the Identity Assurance Initiative. Hopefully you had a chance to participate in one or two of his sessions. But for the past 15 months, Doug really supported the identification and evaluation of COVID-19 related technologies and this whole return to the workplace effort. We also have Robert van den Heuvel, who is that's a new position in Convergint, Business Intelligence Manager in the Digital Transformation team. Robert joined us after 5 years from Gartner, actually, and he currently leads the newly created Business Intelligence unit or initiative. It's really to identify market trends, identify new technology, identify business needs, and really kind of provide a great overview of the market and some of the market priorities and some of the trends that are happening. So, gentlemen, I'm just going to dive right into it because we have a lot to cover, and hopefully, the audience will be able to also share some of, if they need to ask questions. Just a reminder, just use the chat. We'll be happy to answer all the questions that you have. So, Robert, I'll start with you. Just if you can give us kind of an overview. So based on, it's a very dynamic return to workplace and reimagining workplace situation. There are plenty of strategies from companies, different companies taking different approaches. So what do you see are the current trends in the market? And if you can expand and give us some examples.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Amir. So first of all, there's no wrong or right answer in returning back to the office and in what shape or form that's going to be. However, what we really saw out of our research is that the hybrid workplace will be the new norm. And this new norm has been adapted in North America, in China, in India. Europe is lagging a little bit behind there. We've seen in the market that large technology companies or financial institutions like Twitter or Microsoft, they all take different stands on how they see the future and how we go back to the office space and what that means. So when we did research, companies like Twitter and Microsoft, they offer flexible workplaces, they offer flexible work time. So it's really the opposite from, for example, a Google or a Goldman Sachs that say, no, we're actually expecting all of our workers to be back into the office when this is all over. And you can understand that there's a lot involved in those two different worlds and thinking about, for me as a worker, how do I go back and what's expected? The one thing that is really important is for our executives to keep communicating moving forward, because we've seen that over 60% have no plan actually moving forward. So they're still waiting what the market is doing. They're still waiting maybe what their competitors are doing, but internally, colleagues, partners, customers, they want to know, what are you doing? How are we going back to this work environment? And, Am I working from home? Am I going to work 3-4 days into the office and 1 or 2 days at home? We really need to have answers on that. We've seen too that sort of the more traditional industries like the financial industry, they really want their workers back into the office. Whereas more of, technology companies, retail, they know that they have to reshape and rethink of what that office culture looks like. And a thing that really stood out for me is that they've done research on, if we're offering you a more dynamic, flexible work environment and workplace, are you willing to give up a benefit? And 70% of people said, I'm more than happy to give up a benefit when it comes to PTO days, holidays, healthcare benefits. They'd rather have 2 or 3 days less of PTO and a more flexible workspace than the other way around. And the last thing that stood out, and I've seen it in a lot of sessions come back, is that the reduction of real estate. A lot of companies are looking at new ways of reducing their costs, whether it's rental or their property costs, property management costs, and looking at, okay, if we're going back into the office, if we're going at a 50 or 60% capacity, I don't need all this space.
That's 100%. I think that especially here in the US, there's, and I know we have a global audience, but there's this question of vaccine. Are we going to, force our employees to get vaccinated or not? Are we going to track it or not? There's a lot of, are we going to wear a mask in the office? We're not going to wear a mask. There's a whole, a whole set of rules and confusion just around that, which, to your point, Robert, the communication is so critical, just because the anxiety of what do I do and all those things that are happening. I think that this is, one key way to really be able to deal with it. So, Robert, the next question I have for you, really, what are the main challenges or opportunities for both employee and employers in the areas for health, safety, and security? What are really, kind of both ends of the challenges and the opportunities you can see in the market?
Yeah, so I'll start with the challenges, and the number one is definitely mental health issues with employees and with workers. There's a huge increase, depression, people feel isolated, and the main thing too, they feel anxious. Like you mentioned, they feel anxious going back into the office. How do I conduct myself into the office? Like, what are the rules? I have to wear a mask. I don't have to wear a mask. When I go into the building, I have to, but when I'm in the communal kitchen, do I still have to wear it? And do I sit next to my colleague that I've been sitting next to for years? Or there's so many questions, and it gives them anxiety, and they just really want to know how to move forward. The other challenge that we've seen is that the decision-making process is really slowed down. Instead of, especially for management and executives, going into a boardroom and just getting stuff done, decided on, we see that that's taking longer and longer. One, because of the setting, people are not saying, well, I am the only one who can make the decision or wants to make that decision. And secondly, about looking into the future, a great decision right now could mean absolutely nothing in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So a lot of big decisions are being postponed because of the uncertainty of the upcoming weeks and months. One big thing, and we all know for Convergint, the number one thing for us as a company is our culture. And we want to make sure that we keep that culture alive. And when we asked a lot of our clients, they said, we really feel like we're losing our company culture because we can all be in the office and celebrate big wins, or, any new processes and new products or services that we're launching, like it's all, virtual. And then with that comes, if people are not in the office, people feel they can be as creative. So you sit down in a room and you just go on the whiteboard and have a whiteboard session and brainstorming sessions. They are different when you're not in person, and that's a given. And lastly, the challenges for especially new workers or students that come into the workplace, or people that come into a new environment, new company, new industry. Where is that guidance, that day-to-day guidance when you're on the work floor together? You can't always predict or talk about what's happening. Sometimes you just have to be in the office for stuff to happen. We see that's not there. And again, that ties back to people when they come to the office, they feel anxiety about, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do it. And I don't know if there's people that can actually help me. But there's also obviously also pluses in the way we're working right now. And the number one is definitely a higher productivity. I live around in the GTA in Toronto, long commutes to either clients or to the office. That's all gone. When I start my work, I open my laptop and I'm there ready to go. And we've seen it especially for salespeople. They had almost a 10 times higher productivity working from home or from a home office rather than just traveling everywhere. And that means also the reduction of the actual business travel. So I'm talking about local, but obviously also flying around the world to meet clients or to launch products and services, etc. It's also given a lot of companies the opportunity in almost like a must environment about adopting new business models and processes. So if you've told businesses a year and a half, 2 years ago, hey, this is how we're going to conduct business moving forward, nobody would have believed us or anyone. And moving forward, they knew they had to adapt, they had to change the way they're doing business. And that brings me to the last point, and that's the increase in collaboration technology adoption or adaptation. So what we're doing right now, a lot of companies didn't have that in place before, and they know now it's a must-have in order to keep connecting with your colleagues, your partners, and your customers, of course.
I agree with you 100%. I think your last point about the insight, the adaptation, this insight event that we're having is absolutely adaptation to the COVID, and actually it might actually be a proof of some benefits, because usually we have to travel to conferences and go back and forth. It can take a whole week, and here we can provide content and value to customers and our colleagues in a virtual setting that is very convenient, and you can probably have a lot more information provided in a shorter period of time. So Doug, when we're looking at all these technologies, can you give us examples on how security can be used to support the return to work effort? Anything that you've seen, because you've been dealing with it for the past 15, 16 months. Anything you can share with the audience on how security plays a role in this whole thing?
Absolutely right. So we'll rewind the clock real quick when this all started to kind of break at the start of March, and everybody was scrambling for thermal cameras to perform, body temperature checks and to validate that somebody was healthy coming in, right, to the best degree that they could. So we saw a huge leap in not just interest for those solutions so people could continue to go to the workplace, but we also saw an influx of technologies that were ambulance chasing, for lack of a better expression. So we jumped in head first in March and April timeframe, getting our hands on as much technology as possible, looking at what was real, what worked, what didn't, what was kind of positioning themselves as fever detection versus, hey, elevated body temperature, looking at the inner canthus or the forehead. So we tested a lot of technology. The other thing that I think we did really well through that process is didn't necessarily just focus on the technology, but we also tried to understand the regulatory stance of a variety of different agencies, and where was the industry really going to go with all of this. And so, FDA had their guidance, OSHA, EEOC, ADA all had very specific guidance on how they wanted people to bring employees back to work. And so through that process, we really were able to dial in on, one, what was Convergent strategy and how are we going to best support our customers, but also protect them potentially from products that were going to put them in a bad position potentially, whether because they bought something that was on the National Defense Authorization Act blacklist, or if they were buying something that could potentially open them up to, litigation based on not following FDA best practices. So there was a lot on that front, just from a thermal camera perspective, that even to today, we are still dealing with and helping organizations make a decision on if technology needs to get deployed or not. The other things we saw was a lot surrounding analytics, capacity planning, looking for masks. And we also saw a big shift to where people wanted a more touchless environment, to where, hey, if you had, touch biometrics, there was a shift now to start talking about facial recognition or going to touchless biometrics to reduce those surfaces so that there wasn't this constant requirement for cleaning and sanitation. And so we saw a lot of organizations, which also helped us kind of accelerate our facial recognition evaluations, especially from a cloud adoption perspective. We saw that there was an opportunity here to now go wider and deeper with our reviews of some companies. And as you guys may have seen here just in the last 24 hours, we announced kind of a solidification of our partnership with SAFAR. So when you think about, where we were forced to not only evolve, in our way of evaluating products, we were able to do it alongside of our customers. So we were able to deploy systems and actually get real-time insights to the product functionality, best practices around deployment methodologies, and really have them in place so that now we've got a very strong, solidified, thought process around it. I think one of the things that's going to be really interesting now, as all of these various jurisdictions relax guidelines, masks are starting to come off as a result of the vaccine, yet we're still seeing other countries get hit substantially by this. So is there going to be another variant that ends up hitting us? And here we are, relaxing guidelines. We've seen some organizations take the stance that, hey, we had this technology in place for a short period of time. Now we're going to just completely remove it and, just come back to the office. Are we going to see a need for this is going to kind of ebb and flow in waves? Will we see another round of COVID? Or, you know what? Let's think about this holistically. How many people in organizations have spent countless money and time and hours and have challenged their teams to develop new go back to work strategies in the interest of employee health and safety? Why put that all to the side? Because the perception right now is that everything is fine and getting back to normal, when this could actually be applied to the seasonal flu or to other viruses that could potentially impact workplaces, where this could be kind of that new normal. You've already invested the time, the resources, and put standards in place. So why not continue to kind of leverage that to not only demonstrate that there's a long-term vision around health and safety, but make the most of the investments that you've made. And so, from a COVID perspective, right, I think one other telling piece of this, especially from a thermal camera perspective, is that, not everybody ended up developing a fever as a result of having contracted the virus. But most people that end up getting the seasonal flu absolutely end up having a fever. So are there potential use cases down the road that open up the ability to continue to maintain these investments or dial in your strategy further so that you can make the most of this? And that's kind of where, we've gone with all this. Again, regulatory agencies like EEOC and ADA have always viewed the employer-employee relationship as, if you take an employee's temperature, that's considered a medical exam and is prohibited. Once the pandemic was declared, this all became acceptable. So what's going to be really interesting too is to see how those agencies view this long term, and if they put rules in place where employers can make those decisions for themselves based on the industry, based on proximity of the workforce, based on all these factors that may play into a long-term vision of what this could look like.
I agree with you 100%, Doug. There's also, we've seen this well standard that all the celebrities are now pushing in terms of healthy and safe building, that I think is going to be a big driver for some of those changes, because you truly want to create a safe environment for employees. Like, why not? It's just going to increase productivity, and really the security component, whether it's going to be from even experience and convenient perspective. I know you're talking about, the convenience component of mobile credentialing, or any types of self-service, and tie into to some of those systems in the building and services. I think you can talk about it. You have those sessions that you review those as well. But I think putting an integrated strategy together around all those components, I truly think that security can be, a great component, because we do have those sensors that provide the data, and also as a tie-in, whether you're remote employee or you're on site, you're coming on site, you have the tie-in to all those things. Any additional thoughts, Doug?
No, I mean, they all play into that strategy, right? One of the things that we've seen also kind of come to the forefront is workplace efficiency and management around, various teams coming to the office on specific days and having access to particular conference rooms or cubicles. So now we're seeing new applications being implemented into enterprises that are very conscientious about capacity planning and where people are going to be working from and on what floor during what days. And that adds another layer of complexity, because now you've got all of those users getting placed into yet another database within your ecosystem. You've got your HR systems, you've got your IT security systems, you've got your access control. Now you've got this workplace management tool. So we're seeing a real need, more so than I think we've ever seen before, for some level of identity management, to tie these systems together, to have a single point of truth for your identities, to manage the entire hire to retire life cycle, but also simplify and automate the area managers who authorize those individuals coming to the office for those days and times, and not requiring multiple points of data entry, as well as having to go in and actually make changes in the access control platform. You've already got your time zones, your access levels defined. Now you just have to assign the people appropriately to what areas of the business that they're going to be working in for that day. I think the other part of that ties into all of this, right, is all of the attestation applications. That's one thing I was really proud of Convergint doing early on, is coming out with this free contact tracing application where you could run a report against, someone that was COVID positive in the access control system, and identify individuals that were within a given time frame in close proximity to that person. So that, coupled with, integrating with a self-attestation tool where, if you say, hey, I've been around somebody that was COVID positive, or I'm not feeling well today, well, that automatically then revokes your access rights for a predetermined period of time until you can verify with the manager that you are healthy, that you are okay to return to work, that you had a negative test. And so all those things working symbiotically between each other is really what we've been able to kind of develop a strategy around over the last year, which, again, all of this thought process, all of these things organizations are now trying to take steps to for the long term. This shouldn't just be pushed to the wayside because right now everything is or seems to be okay. There is a high probability that this could, variant or spread, kick up again. We need to be prepared for that. We need to continue to have the technology and thought process around that until, vaccines are effective against more strains or variations, or, again, what else could be coming in the future. So a lot to think about, but I think everyone's been going down a pretty good path, and I feel very confident in the strategy we've developed today.
Thank you, Doug, 100%. And I think just to build up on your point, we saw that the chief security officer or the security team initially were not, in most companies, were not really involved in the decision making and what to do and how to do things. They were then only consulted later on, which I think, in my mind, it was a miss, just because of the capabilities of the security team. So, Robert, what do you see? What is the perceived role of the kind of chief security officer? What do you think, or what do you see that the market indicators, and how can the CSO can support a recovery or be a part of the creation of this new norm?
Yeah, so we definitely see a huge role and a very important role for the chief security officer or security director, because as Doug pointed out, it's going way beyond the traditional services and responsibilities that they had before. Now it's actually about people coming back to a safe work environment. And this is a massive opportunity for the security teams to collaborate, as you said, not only about security, but you're talking to HR, you're talking to plant managers about how are they coming back to the plants and to work in the full shifts instead of at 50 or 60% capacity. Internal stakeholders, like you said, they should be at the tables with the executives about major decisions that have to be taken to look into the future and say, what are we going to do if this continues, which it still is, or if it comes back, or if it, comes back within 2 or 3 years? Are we ready? Are we stable and agile enough to come back to this and not make the same mistakes again?
Robert, I can't tell you how much that resonates with me, because there were so many security leaders and practitioners that were stuck with products that weren't functional for their teams, that had a lot of issues in the field, that they ended up finding out after the fact wouldn't provide maybe an integration path, or weren't even accurate to begin with, right? So they were stuck with something that they were putting faith in, that were, bought by teams outside of security, where they weren't able to do a review on it. And at the end of the day, they then had responsibility for trying to make, lemonade out of onions. So it was an interesting kind of experience for a lot of our partners and our customers.
Yeah, and that also ties into my next point, is that as a security team, and especially as leading that security team, you have to act as an expert, because moving forward, it's going to be so important that, like you said, Doug, the decisions that are being made on implementing new products and services is for the long haul. And, they're not cheap. So it's a big investment. And if you use an investment only for a year and a half, and you think COVID is out and we can just put it on the shelves, it's not where we're heading. And that's why I think, teams like ourselves, and as Doug mentioned, there were so many different products, dozens of products on the market that just weren't capable of actually doing what the product said that they were going to do. So, really get the insights from teams like ourselves that actually have used all the solutions. And we only came back, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but with maybe 4 or 5 solutions for thermal, for example, that we felt comfortable actually selling, because what it said on the box, it actually did it. And then going beyond those traditional solutions, one, and Doug, you already talked about it in the sessions yesterday as well, is about identity and access management, right? Big one to really focus on. And the last one, and if you don't have it on your agenda right now, literally put it at the top, and that's cybersecurity. Like, you cannot get away with not having any cybersecurity policies, strategies, and solutions in place when you know that your workforce can be logging in from anywhere, could be sitting anywhere, in public spaces, in a home environment where the kids are using the same computer as you are, and clicking on emails that shouldn't be clicked on. Like, it's so easy for hackers to get in right now. If it's not on your radar, please do so, because I know we've seen, these past couple of months, some big breaches of companies that thought, it's never going to happen. We have all the doors locked, but the back door was right open. And then the last point I wanted to make here about your, oh yeah, go ahead, Doug.
No, finish your point. I actually want to address a question that just got surfaced.
Okay. So lastly, and this is managers and especially mid-level managers, we've seen that they were actually afraid of, when we're working from home, what's my role, and am I still, a vital piece of the puzzle moving forward? And we've actually seen that it's like more important than ever to dial in with your teams on a regular basis, making sure that they are okay, that their mental health is okay, that the team is still collaborating, that the collaboration between the different departments is still there. As a manager, you're a so important piece of that. So keep communicating with your teams, with the executive teams, and most importantly, also with your customers and with your partners, to tell them what are you doing in these scenarios and how do you think your company, your teams are moving forward in this as well. And as Doug said, this is not about COVID-19. This was just like a stepping stone into what's coming next, because especially your colleagues, your team members, they are now demanding a good, safe work environment beyond COVID. And not only, oh, COVID is done, we'll just go back to the normal, because that's non-existing anymore.
Yeah, definitely. So a question was just asked, what is the main factor in safe, healthy, and collaborative workspace? And this is going to be my take. Obviously, you know, any other thoughts from Robert or Amir on this? But I think it starts with your workflow, and it starts with how do we bring people back, and what's the employee journey? What's the experience that they have from the time they get prepared to leave their home to come to the office, and then what does it look like once they've gone through some type of screening process? You know, I think about there's some level of self-attestation, there's some level of planning that they know days, times when they're going to be coming, who's responsible for maintaining that and notifying those employees. But then when you arrive on site, right, is there some kind of queuing? Do you have to show, for example, a QR code or a, hey, I passed my attestation this morning before a potential temperature check? And then once you get on the secure side, what's your policy surrounding masks? Does everybody have to wear a mask still in the building? If you're deemed healthy for the day and you're sitting at your own desk, can you remove your mask? Do you still have to stay separated around the water cooler? What are the responsibility of the employees so that they can maintain that safe working environment after they've arrived at the site? And obviously that requires collaboration across, you know, multiple business units. That's going to require HR's take, security, EH&S, executive leadership to develop a plan that is well spelled out, both for the employee, but then on the back end, also the tracking, the compliance, the reporting that may be necessary if an outbreak occurs.
It's 100%.
So once you can define your workflow, yeah, I was just going to say, last thought. Once you define the workflow, then you can start to insert the technology that can complement those stages for each one of those different use cases.
Yeah, Doug, I couldn't agree with you more, because the experience is going to be, if we make it very complex and hard to follow, so the experience of the employees, it's just going to raise the anxiety level. And also we need to be flexible enough. You know, the summer might be better in some places, but then as Robert mentioned, things can switch. Doug, you mentioned also the different variants. So we need to be flexible enough to move from plan A to plan B and have a proper way of communicating of what measures are now in place to accommodate those different risks. And when it comes to employees or contractors or visitors, you know, there needs to be a clear policy to all of those, because I heard, you know, companies, and Robert gave some examples, but Eli Lilly said that, you know, they were open throughout the pandemic because of the manufacturing facilities, but they had planned to rolling out now to return to the office space, which is going to be gradual return, and they're going to have their people or employees vaccinated. But, you know, all those things needs to be well communicated up front. You know, what happens, you know, this is a lot of collaboration with HR, with legal department. It's very involved. So it is a team effort from a company's perspective, and a part of it is really the workflows, the data points, the experience, the collaboration. So it's going to be very easy for employees to reduce that anxiety. Robert was talking about it, that we know that some companies, we see the anxiety level is high, in a way that people are rethinking how they're going to go back to work, if at all. So, you know, we really need to be conscious about all these challenges, and be sure that we have the right plan in place. So I think that these are all little points that just need to be all put together in a very concise manner.
Yeah, and to those points too, just keep creating clarity about what's expected also from the employees, like you said, whether that's with the process of how they're coming into the building, and once they're in the building, what can they do, what can they do, what's that process, where do they have to sanitize their hands, where do they have to wear a mask, where don't they have to wear a mask. Just be clear about it moving forward, because changing it every 2-3 days, the anxiety is way back up again, right?
100%. So, Robert, maybe we just take that just to go into the topic of risks, because I want to make sure that we cover the topic of risks the market has identified, and also, just to emphasize some of those dynamics. The Yankees, New York Yankees just reported yesterday or the day before that 9 of their staff members, had COVID, although they were fully vaccinated. So obviously that just shows how dynamic the situation is. So, Robert, what do you see kind of the main risks in the market at this particular point?
Yeah, so from a higher level, it's basically about not being able to react to events, in a timely manner. Waiting to see what your environment is doing, then you're usually too late. So have a strong plan in place moving forward, that when you know that this is coming again, and it probably is, in what shape or form we don't know, but have a plan in order to react and respond quicker. And with that, we asked executives, do you have a plan B in place? And it was pretty shocking that a lot of people don't have it. They just don't have something, at the back burner that they can say, we can always get back to it. That when this happens again, we can go back to our normal norm and back to our now whatever the norm is. And we know that we are comfortable and can still conduct business with our clients and partners, and with our employees as well. And the thing is too that, and we talked about this a bit earlier, that please make sure that you're informed, because the biggest risk right now is to just jump on the first solution that you see that sort of maybe makes sense in the situation that you're in right now. And $400,000, $500,000 down the road, you realize this is not sustainable for the upcoming years to come. And we just invested all of this time and money and resources into something that maybe we'll keep for another couple of months, and that's it. So yeah, get yourself informed, and not always follow just the marketing outings. Like we see them all every day on LinkedIn and, and on Twitter about, this is amazing and this is the best and the fastest and the cheapest. And then you realize it's really not like that. So the biggest risk is not being informed about the right solutions, and the right solutions for your company. Because maybe it's a great solution for your neighbor, but just not for you. And that's why there's teams like ourselves and everybody's account executives team to inform you, and just sit down and, spend an hour. I think that's an hour really well spent to talk about, what do you guys see in the market and everything that we're talking about right now, and how can I apply that to my business, and what do you think the solution should be, instead of thinking, no, we have to have this brand or this brand because we're familiar with it. And the one that you already said, Amir, and I was pretty shocked to actually read it, but analysts actually believe that there's a resignation boom coming sooner rather than later. About people that are so fed up with the situation that they're in. They have kids that are homeschooling, and they just want to take a break, and they just want to step out, reinvent themselves, think about, where do I want to be? Where do I want to go in the upcoming years? And they just take a year or 2 years off to really, sort of refine themselves and think about, what am I going to do? that can have a big impact on your business as well, and on your services to your customers. How are you going to do that? Do you have a plan in place that, you know, if people are resigning? I worked with a school board here, and they said that at one point they had over 60% of their staff off just because they were done. And there were still all these students waiting to have a teacher in front of the classroom, whether it's virtual or in person. How are you dealing with that? That's a huge risk for the continuation of your business. And I don't think we talked about it today, but we did yesterday. And Amir, you talked about it, is that duty of care, right? So it's not only, again, those four walls, and that's your office, where you are responsible for the health and well-being of your colleagues and employees. No, it goes way beyond that right now. The workspace that's either at home or in any other place where they're working. And Leslie, and I think the main point that we want to make at the end is there's going to be a hybrid workplace, and be agile and be flexible about what that's going to look like. Because I truly believe if large companies say we're expecting all of our colleagues to be back in the office, whenever that is, in a couple of months when this is sort of slowed down, I truly don't believe that that's going to be the new norm, and that people are going to accept that that's still the way of how we conduct business in this, you know, for the past, you know, what is it, 18 months now that we're in this pandemic.
I totally agree, Doug. Anything to add from your end on the risk? I think the point of duty of care. This is something that talking about the role of the chief security officer. I think that by itself can be a huge headache. Just imagine the responsibility of now thousands of employees that are everywhere, you know, versus having control over several locations. If you have any storms, any natural disaster event, any other security related event, the cyber risk, all those things are really a part of it, which I think that we're not really grasping the magnitude of what it's going to look like. But Doug, I know from a technology perspective, there are specific risks, and Robert mentioned, I think you did, on how to introduce those new technologies, integration, scalability, to make sure that it's working in scale for organization. Any risk associated with that you can highlight?
Yeah, so with change sometimes comes risk, right? So from the perspective of the technology that's being introduced, right? I mean, it comes down to one, establishing that workflow and that process for people coming back to work and being a big part of that. But when you think about kind of the hybrid workforce, right? You can have a little bit more control over what's happening on premise, but when people are working remotely, you know, we've seen stories where, you know, one spouse is or one roommate is the employable one. They go out and get a second job, turn over the keys to the kingdom to the other person at home, and they are doing that person's job for them. I mean, we've seen several instances of this, right? Which then ties into how does kind of I guess in terms of validating the identity of an individual, even when they're not on premise and you don't have cameras in place to, you know, be able to verify that individual was who they say they were, that used the card to enter into the space. So we're seeing, you know, a shift where even more so than ever before, logical and physical access are converging. And that could be in the form of, you know, biometrics at home to access your computer, biometrics on card, leveraging something like the Sentry card to be able to validate that the person who is accessing that information had to validate with a fingerprint. And so all of those things end up playing into, yeah, there's absolutely risk with people working from home, leaving their laptop open, you know, now that they can go back to a Starbucks and work, but not come back to the office. And they decide to get up and grab something, and someone's, you know, looking over their shoulder and now is looking at PII or IP associated with that organization. You know, that's a risk. So I think figuring out how to continue down this convergence path of the logical side, tied to physical security, cleaning up your identities, being able to manage that hire to retire process much more seamlessly and in as close to real time as possible, is going to start to mitigate a lot of those now hybrid challenges that we're starting to face.
I completely agree. Thank you, Doug. There's another question that just came in. Do you see cost as a major challenge? What are some economic consideration for an organization with respect to coming up with a safe return to work plan? So I don't know, Robert, if you want to comment, or Doug.
Yeah, I can certainly think about, first of all, as we see that the costs that are associated with this are, a lot of them are just a must have. Like, you cannot go back to the workplace and say, we have no process in place, we don't have those cameras in place, or we don't have the workflow in place. So you can't really get out of it and say, well, we'll just do our own thing. The other one that I think is very important, that I think that this will actually free up some cash or investment abilities when you look at returning to the workplace. And if you know that you're really scaling that down, instead of having 3 floors in the building, you only need 1 or 2 when it comes to facility management, the services in there, your overhead there, your rent, all that stuff will actually go down instead of going up. I think about myself, like, if you think about how many business kilometers have I driven, how many people have I taken out for lunch, like, all of those costs, they are non-existing anymore, or maybe 10% of what it used to be. So I think it's not about putting in a lot more into this, and it needs to come from somewhere, and I understand that. I think you can really look at ways of, okay, if we can cut cost in these elements, we can reinvest that where we would usually invest it into our real estate or in our actual office. It will just go back to the same bucket. Instead of it being the physical office, it's the virtual office for your workers. So make sure that they have a good desk, and that they have good seating arrangements and good screens and stuff like that. So it's just shifting it, from one to another, rather than adding a lot more cost to the challenges that we're facing right now.
Thank you, Robert. Doug, any thoughts on your end?
Cost is always going to be a challenge, especially when it's unplanned, right? And so in this case, what we're seeing, specifically around technologies here, is that organizations that made an investment are using it currently. What are you going to do with that technology long term? That's something that we talked about already, but needs to be continued to be talked about and discussed, and figure out a long-term plan to get the most bang for the buck that you've already invested in. I think one other challenge that's going to be forthcoming is that, what's also your risk? What's the potential cost of doing nothing? So if you choose not to invest in solutions, if you choose not to, do temperature checks, that may be okay for your business and for the capacity that you're planning for. But what if it's not? What if it's not enough and something happens? Is that going to be scrutinized and be a higher cost on the back end for having done nothing? So it is it's a odd challenge to be faced with, especially because we can't control something we can't see. So it boils down to, spend what you think protects the organization and your employees, contractors, and visitors to the best of your ability within reason, that follows the guidelines that have been outlined, and plan on it being in place for the foreseeable future, because you did make an investment. Just because everybody has a perception of things getting better when they go out to eat or go to the grocery store doesn't mean that you have to relax guidelines at work. Make employee safety a priority and continue to maintain that for as long as you can, until, again, those regulatory agencies come back and say, okay, we're going to pre-pandemic standards, and these items, this health tracking, these health temperature checks, this compliance and reporting is no longer required. It's not acceptable any longer. We're going to respect that employer-employee relationship.
So thank you, Doug. And I think I would just add, at the end of the day, every industry is going to manage it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, this human, I call it human challenger experiment that happened shows that companies with agile approach and flexibility were able actually to not only recover but flourish under the current conditions in most industries. And I think that once we're looking at the possibility, the realm of possibilities, so the future, to Robert's point, with a hybrid workforce, with the ability now to tap into talent that is not necessarily geographically associated with a home office or with an office, and have the ability to manage that a little bit better, I think just provides some additional opportunities for companies with, again, with an agile approach, which brings me to the last question, Doug. What are the technologies that will support a transition, what we call to the future of the workplace, whether it's going to be a security related or overall the office experience, meeting rooms, AV, VR, and any of, I think that Michelle was talking about, 5G. So what do you see? How, what's the future looks like, I guess?
So, I mean, a lot of that is already getting implemented, right? Organizations, to your point, that had a really agile approach and, took the opportunity to use this as an opportunity to refresh technology and grow beyond their four walls are the ones that are flourishing right now. So technology that I see becoming more important is one, there's probably some level of decentralization for the security teams and being able to give them access to cloud solutions that give them the opportunity to work remotely. That's a huge business benefit when you think about it, right? A lot of IT and IT security organizations have been doing that for a long time. One, because it's very difficult to find good talent, and they don't want to have to force them to move to a location that they don't want to live in. So you can attract top talent in the physical security industry for your NOCs and SOCs that, by using a cloud-based fusion center, can operate just as efficiently from home or from a location of their choosing than having to come to a central location every day. So I think that's one area to focus on for sure. I think the other areas are certainly migrating to newer, more secure credentials that could potentially support FIDO2 capabilities so that you're able to secure your information better remotely. So really that convergence of logical and physical, where that identity either validated through FIDO2, through some level of biometric authentication, that's going to help, again, just another layer that makes it difficult for the potential for bad to happen. So those are the areas that I see probably the most opportunity for growth. And then lastly, I would say identity management, right? Being able to have something that is your single source of truth. One, to reduce the amount of manual data entry. Two, to be able to manage that hire to retire life cycle in more real time. So when a change occurs in HR or across ITSM, that change occurs on that person's laptop or with their credential in real time so that they can't gain access to that sensitive information when they're no longer part of the organization. Starting to think about those things holistically and looking at the benefits of migrating to more of a cloud-centric strategy is going to, again, decentralize the efforts, take a lot of that burden off of your employees that do want to work remotely and have that balanced lifestyle that they started to become accustomed to when they were working from home. All of those things are going to add up to efficiencies, cost savings, and the potential for growth for your business, depending on what it is that you do. And again, this is going to be very industry specific. What I'm talking about won't necessarily apply to organizations that do manufacturing, that you have to have people physically on premise doing things. Whereas, if you've got workers that don't have to be, there's an opportunity here. So I think that's where I'll kind of leave it at this stage. Those are the three areas I see probably the biggest growth opportunity and a migration probably starting to happen in the near term.
Yeah, I agree with that, Doug. Yeah, I think that also we've seen some solutions that not only on the security side help navigate this complex environment, but also on the information side, where you just use that platform to send the right information to the employees in terms of services. Again, what we talked about in terms of intelligence, we talked about the experience center or meeting rooms or new headquarters with a more sophisticated way to collaborate, which will enhance the experience, not necessarily look at your phone or small laptop, but really kind of combine all those services in an integrated fashion. So I think we have a lot of opportunities to not only use the security technologies for security and experience, but also to really create those savings and efficiencies and experience to make sure that the organizations are functioning. Not to mention the video side with the smart sensors and anything that can be attributed to that, which we have a whole bunch of session on Insight, so that can be a discussion by itself. Robert, before we adjourn, any final thoughts from your end?
I think, and like you said, we have to see it holistically and not only thinking about the pandemic right now, but everything that's coming after, where the new norm will be what it wasn't the normal norm before. And on that, I think people and your employees and your partners and your customers are demanding a safe working environment. And moving forward, when the pandemic comes back in another shape or form, this is how we are going to actually build the future from now on towards the upcoming years. And as a security team, I think you're pivotal in this whole journey, and make sure that you keep collaborating with all of your teams instead of you being an almost isolated team that just does the cameras and access control. It goes way beyond that right now. And look at the new technologies that are out there and that we just cannot miss. I'll say it again, cybersecurity, like you cannot just ignore that anymore. And use us, Convergint, to be that sparring partner, to sit down and say, give me an overview or help me with this, because we're here to help you. We're here to help your teams, to make it really about you and how you have to involve, instead of, I see something in the market and I hope it will stick, because you just don't know. So I'll leave it to that. And again, communicate.
100%. So Robert, Doug, thank you for your input. Thanks for the participant. Thank you for participating in this session. Enjoy the rest of Insight. Tomorrow we have a market day, which a lot of the technology solution we're talking about here are going to be demoed tomorrow. So hopefully you're going to continue and enjoy the summit. And again, thank you again, and stay safe, everybody.
Amir, I see one more question. Do we have 1 or 2 more minutes? It just popped up.
We have probably 1 minute. Yes.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to take that one. So the
Go
question
ahead.
was, what would the biggest threat to a healthy workplace now be that some restrictions are being lifted across the country? And I think my take on it is, look at the Yankees. Everybody was vaccinated and they had a COVID outbreak. I would say the biggest risk would be going and thinking like it's pre-pandemic.
We're done.
I think you need to continue to go forward. As we've discussed on this call, continue to have best practices in place, think about employee safety, and don't just toss aside all the work that you and others have put into the last year getting to this stage. Keep it in place, keep moving forward, make it company policy until it no longer, from a regulatory perspective, can be.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the questions, and stay safe.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.